Language Pathology and Audiology and Hearing Aid Dispensers Board meeting to order for May 14th, 2021, and we are starting, my clock says 8:59. I would first like to call the roll. So if you could answer that you are here when I call your name. Board members, Holly Kaiser.
Here.
Todd Borges.
Here.
Karen Chang.
Here.
Gilda Dominguez.
Here.
Debbie Snow.
Here.
And of course I'm here, so we do have a quorum. I would like to ask the board staff if they would like to introduce themselves.
Good morning, this is Anthony Payne, legal counsel.
Any other board staff here that would like to introduce themselves?
This is Sharice Burns, the Assistant Executive Officer.
Good morning.
Dr. Raggio, oops, I'm sorry. I just want to make sure that you picked up my introduction. Did you hear me?
I did not.
Okay. Paul Sanchez, Executive Officer.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Heather Olivares, Board Legislation and Regulation Analyst.
Good morning, Heather. I'm not sure there's any other board staff on the call that I can see. So I would just like to mention that we're not going to have public members introduce themselves at this point, but if you choose to speak at some point, we would like you to introduce yourselves at that time. Moving on to agenda item 6 in your board book, we will now entertain public comment for items not on the agenda. Of course, you know that we are not able to discuss or take action on any of these items, but we would like to know if there are items that we should be looking at for a future meeting. So I'd like to invite anybody. So, yeah, moderator, if you can.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I have opened up the question and answer panel. So if any member of the public would like to make a public comment, you can type, I would like to make a comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and submit it to all panelists. We are displaying instructions for your reference. There is a 3-minute time limit. I'll give a 30-second warning. And we do have a Dr. Amit Ghazalia that would like to make a comment at this time. So Dr. Ghazalia, you have been unmuted.
Good morning. Back in February, when we had the previous meeting, I had spoken during the public comment period about the ability for audiologists to perform cognitive screenings for our patients. There are numerous studies. We have subject matter experts available nationally. All 3 audiology organizations include cognitive screenings within our scope of practice. After that meeting, I was told that we would have this listed in the agenda item for this meeting. However, I have heard nothing since February from anybody about this topic. Not only did I email, I've also did the public comment, and I don't know if anything is being done. I understand the board needed more time. However, nobody's reached out to either myself or some of the other leaders around the country about cognitive screening. And I'm a little disappointed that this is how we've decided to move forward on this topic. So what I'd like to do is I would like to request that whoever is leading that topic, please reach out to me. My email address, and I'll put it in the comments too, is HEARDR, that's here doctor, @gmail.com. And if you don't want me to be an expert on this, that's fine. We have other audiologists, doctors around the country that can speak on this topic. But I'm still very disappointed that nothing's been done and it's not even on the agenda this time, even though we were told that it would be. So again, Amit Ghazalia, I'm an audiologist here in Los Angeles.
All right, and that is the end of our request for public comment. Madam Chair, would you like me to go ahead and close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, it has been closed.
Okay, comments duly noted. I'd like to move on to item number 7, which is a review and possible approval of the June 30th, 2020 board teleconference meeting minutes. I'd like to ask the board if they have, or board members, if they have any comments or corrections they'd like to make to those minutes. I'm just curious. I had 2 copies of it and I don't know if there's a difference between them. They appear to be identical at first glance.
Dr. Raggio, this is Sharice Burns. They're identical. We just had some packet shuffling sometimes, so
I see. Okay.
apologies.
Okay. Okay, so hearing no board comment about it, is there any public comment about these minutes?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment on this agenda item, please type "I would like to make a comment" using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists. We are displaying instructions for your reference and we'll give you a moment. All right, this is the moderator. I see no requests for public comment at this time. Madam Chair, would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, moving on to item number 8, review and possible approval of the February 5th, 2021 board teleconference meeting minutes. I'd like to ask the board members if there are any corrections or comments to those minutes. Okay, hearing none. Are there any public comments related to those minutes?
This is the moderator, and I will go ahead and open up the Q&A panel. It is now available. If any member of the public would like to comment on this agenda item, please type "I would like to make a comment" and submit it to all panelists. We are displaying instructions and we'll give you a moment. All right, this is the moderator. I see no request for public comment. Madam Chair, would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
Okay, and I think we might need motions on the minutes as
Yeah,
well.
I'll get to it. Okay, I would like to ask for a motion to accept the minutes from June 30th, 2020 and February 5th, 2021. I believe we can jointly accept those by motion.
I move that we accept the minutes from June 30th and February 5th, 2021. This is Holly.
Okay, Holly, do we have a second?
Second.
Todd, I think. Is there any further discussion about the minutes? Okay, Sharice, would you call a vote, please?
Absolutely. Dr. Raggio,
Aye.
Ms. Kaiser,
Aye.
Mr. Borges,
Aye.
Ms. Chang,
Aye.
Ms. Dominguez,
Aye.
Ms. Snow.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to agenda item number 9, the board chair's report. We have just a few things to talk about on that. So if you look under that tab, first of all, we would like to once again announce the appointment of Gilda Dominguez, speech pathologist, to the board. She's a Southern California speech pathologist, and she's going to take the seat vacated by a longtime board member, Dee Parker. Sorry, I'm looking at text messages at the same time here. I would also like to look at the reminder of our upcoming board conference call dates, which you can see on the second page. We'll talk a minute if there's any questions about those dates in a moment. But you can see as they are planned at this point, our next meeting would be August 6th. Teleconference, we have not yet learned from DCA whether we'll be able to meet in person or whether this will still be a teleconference, including October 8th meeting and November 5th. The last aspect of the board chair's report is talking about the subcommittees for the, or the standing committees, I should say, for the board, and the board members who are going to serve or have agreed to serve on those committees or are mandated to serve. So we can see under the Speech Language Pathology Practice Committee, the chair is Holly Kaiser. Gilda Dominguez and Debbie Snow will both be members on that committee. The Audiology Practice Committee is a little short of members because we still have a vacant position for an audiologist, but I will chair that committee and Karen Chang will serve with me as public member.
Excuse me, Dr. Rajo?
Sorry, yes?
Pardon me for the interruption. I just wanted to remind everyone that this item was a hand carry, just to make sure that everyone has the memo that we added as a hand carry later. Thank you.
Anybody who doesn't have this?
And this is Charisse. It's also available on our website for members of the public.
Okay, so if there's any board member who doesn't have it, please let us know. I'll continue with the Hearing Aid Dispensers Committee. Todd Borges is the chair. I will serve as a member as well as Karen Chang, but we have some vacancies there as well because we are lacking a hearing aid dispenser position on the board. We have a couple of ad hoc committees. The Sunset Review Committee will, both myself and as chair and Holly Kaiser as vice chair will serve on that committee. And then we've had a couple of newer committees that we've are grateful to have members step up who are willing to serve. And one of them is the Enforcement Ad Hoc Committee, which will be chaired by Debbie Snow. And also Holly Kaiser will serve on that. This committee is to review and recommend to the board proposed revisions to the laws, regulations, and policies related to the board's enforcement of the Board's Practice Act. Our other ad hoc committee is the Legislative Committee. It will be chaired by Karen Chang, and I will serve on that committee with her. And the role of this committee is to review and recommend to the board proposed positions on legislation impacting the board, its licensees, and the Board's Practice Act. So I'd like to ask if there are any comments on any element of the board chair's report. I'd like to say that we will be talking later on in the meeting about some of the assignments to these committees. You can look forward to getting some updated information on that later today. But are there any other comments? Hearing none, are there any public comments?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment on this agenda item, please type "I would like to make a comment" using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists. We are displaying instructions. This is the moderator. I see no requests for public comment at this time. Madam Chair, would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
Okay, it's closed.
I presume I would accept a motion to accept the board chair's report.
Dr. Rajo, we do not need a motion to accept the board's report. We can entertain one, but it's not necessary as far as I know.
Okay,
That is
and
correct.
that would also be the case for the executive officer's report.
Yes, Anthony, am I right on that?
Yes, Paul, that's right.
Okay, is there any other comments about it, about the board chair's report? You can see your terms also on this page 1 if you are unsure about that. Hearing no further comment, I'd like to move on to Executive Officer's Report, item 10 on the agenda. Mr. Sanchez.
Good morning, everyone. In item 10 of your binders, you have my report, and then you have separated by yellow dividers some accompanying data that goes along with it. First of all, I just want to again follow Dr. Rajo's welcome to Gilda Dominguez, our newest speech language pathology board member. We're excited to have her on the board and excited at the work that we're going to be doing together. I also want to acknowledge Dr. Dee Parker, who served as our board chair and just was a huge asset to the board for many years and was one of the first board members that welcomed me on board when I came to the board. So we're going to miss her. As I go through the report, I would like to just to keep the discussion going. If you have any comments, please feel free to raise your hand and I'll acknowledge the comments. Or if you have any questions, I'm sorry, about the report. We have some newer board members, so I want to make sure that everyone understands the reports that accompany it and what we're talking about as far as the administration of the board. So I will start with some of these projects and initiatives that the board office has taken on that are just huge. For instance, we have, as we've discussed in previous board meetings, our business modernization project, which is a collaborative effort with DCA's Organizational Improvement Office to provide the board with an IT solution that will transition us from our existing databases, our existing system, which we call CAS, to provide a more modern system, a more updated system that gives licensees and applicants, access to even complete online transactions. This has been a long time coming. A board of our size to take on a project like this, it can present great challenges, but we're very pleased that we are moving forward. We've done some great work with Charisse and her staff. They have spent, I'm not exaggerating when I say, countless hours working with different staff to get the foundations and the structure of this going. So today we have with us a very special guest, Sean O'Connor, who is Chief of Project Delivery and Admin Services. And Sean is one of those people at DCA that is just a bright light for us. For a board like ours, he's a huge asset and has just helped us in getting this project going. So I'm going to allow Sean O'Connor to speak right now and talk a little bit about what we're doing. And please feel free to ask him any questions. He's very knowledgeable about this. He's done this with several boards. He's taken them over this mountain and they're up and running. So Sean, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to you.
Thank you, Paul, for those kind words. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board, for the opportunity to come and discuss this very important effort, as Paul had mentioned. I'm Sean O'Connor, and my title is the Chief of Project Delivery and Administrative Services at the Office of Information Services. And I've been with the department on the IT side for about the last 10 years. And then prior to that, I was at the Board of Behavioral Sciences, which is a board that licenses various mental health professionals. So I like to think that I'm able to bring to my position the perspective of both the IT side as well as the perspective of the program side, and understand where you are coming from. So hopefully others feel that way as well. I like to think that is the case. What I'd like to do is to go through a brief set of talking points regarding where the speech language pathology and audiology and hearing aid dispensers board is in the business modernization process. And then, as Paul had mentioned, entertain any questions that you may have on this. So the Business Modernization Initiative, which is being led by the Department of Consumer Affairs by two key groups. One, Paul mentioned earlier, the Organizational Improvement Office, as well as the Office of Information Services. And we're working with boards collaboratively, and an emphasis on collaboratively and partnership throughout this presentation you'll definitely pick up on. But we're working with your board, and your board is one of 17 programs who are going through this process. At a high level, each program goes through a thought out and documented methodology of extensive business process mapping, functional requirement gathering to ensure we know what the expectations are of the system and what the board needs to improve their services. And then we also proceed through a mandatory set of project planning activities that comes from the California Department of Technology. That is called the Project Approval Lifecycle, or PAL, P-A-L for short. And then finally, we transition into the most exciting and most important phase, which is system implementation. So where is speech pathology board in all of this? The board has completed already the early stages of the business process mapping and the functional requirements development. And of the 4-stage project approval lifecycle that I talked about earlier, the board is already through 2 of those 4 stages. We are actively working on the 3rd stage with Charisse and Paul and some of your other staff. And we're targeting a project start date at this point of the fall of this year. So, that's really right around the corner. So we have quite a good pace that we have built up and a lot of momentum so far. And it's very encouraging and very exciting. And it's always an exciting time as we get set to embark on an implementation effort. It's one of the things that makes my job very enjoyable is working with the programs as we get into the implementation phase. I also wanted to mention that while our budget change proposal for project funding is not yet completely approved by the legislature, we are already through 2 of the key committees. So that's very encouraging that our project funding seems to be sailing through the legislature. And I wanted to emphasize something that Paul had mentioned, and it's been evident through every step of this process, is that this is a really a business-driven initiative. We have found, based on our experiences on IT projects in the past and projects that I've led and been a key member of, that the business ownership and buy-in and partnership with the IT side is really the most critical thing to the overall success of the project. That partnership, that good communication, that spirit to work together, prioritize, plan, and replan, those are all the things that really make an IT system work. I think to this date, and Paul alluded to it earlier, we have been achieving that, and I'm very, very encouraged, and I'm very optimistic about the prospects of having a very successful IT effort that really substantially improves the services that the board can provide to its constituents. So we've been hitting all our marks there to date. A couple things that I wanted to mention about what we have done from a planning perspective and drawn on lessons learned from previous projects to really make sure that we're on a pathway to success for this board. Part of it is, to borrow a cliche, we plan, and we replan. The CDT project approval lifecycle mandates that we complete adequate planning prior to actually starting any IT project. So it may seem like technicality, but one of the things that is important is, we don't establish an actual project budget or project schedule until we have brought on the vendors that we have contracted with and understood that our project schedule and project budget baselines are actually feasible. So that's an important aspect of ensuring success on the project. And we also pursue a implementation methodology that is what is referred to as Agile. Folks who are familiar with IT projects, you may have heard this. It's kind of a buzzword that is thrown out around quite a bit, an Agile development methodology, but I'll kind of characterize it very briefly for you. We've had a lot of success with this on many of the projects that we've done so far. The difference between doing an Agile project versus the previous method of doing projects was we have, in the old way, we would pretty much start a project, work for 3 years on something, and then implement all the functionality all at once with big complex data conversion, major staff disruption where your entire staff is going home on a Friday, coming back on a Monday with an entirely new system, and a lot of high intensity, high risk kind of retraining. The new way that we've been doing things, which is now possible because of advancements in technology that allow us to do this, but we can incrementally roll out software. We can divide up the work into logical chunks and push to production more frequently. So we could position ourselves, for example, to within 6 months of the project start, or certainly less than a year, be able to implement multiple online renewal transactions or multiple online initial license or exam transactions for your most populous license types, instead of delaying until the end of the project and rolling everything out all at once. And this is a process that is not really theoretical. This is a process that's been in practice. We've done this on our first business modernization project that is within 5 months of completing. We have business modernization cohort 1 that is out a little ahead of where you are at in the process, but they've actually implemented dozens of transactions online, online complaint forms, back office evaluations, online application status, real-time application status updates for licensees and applicants, as well as email communication back and forth about deficiencies. So we've used this process to achieve all of those improvements for programs already within DCA's portfolio. So we're excited to bring something that works to your program and really learn from some of the lessons that we've had so far on the projects. Just one more point that I wanted to make regarding working with a vendor on this project. One of the key aspects of success for DCA on recent projects is the way that we structure any vendor contracts. So previously, there was models of contracts where you got into a big contract with a vendor, or maybe a time and materials contract that didn't have a lot of deliverable quality checkpoints in it. But we've really arrived at a contract sort of management structure that we've utilized for about the past 3 years that works well. And what we do is, much like we break up the functionality that we want to implement from an incremental perspective, we also manage the contractor in a similar way. So we take an overall contract that might span a 2 to 3 year period, and we take the work that is outlined in that contract and break it down into usually monthly increments to say, what deliverables, what functionality do we expect you to be working on over this 30-day period? What staff are working on it, and what will be the evidence or measures that the work has been completed. And then the state would approve that ahead of time so that we are aware of what's going to be going on, who's going to be working on the project, and we can comment if there are staff on the project that have been non-performant, and exclude them from future work order authorizations. And the process for that then at the end of it, once they've completed all the tasks and the deliverables, the state would review it, make sure all of those were completed to the quality that we would expect before they're allowed to invoice. So one way to think of it is kind of like a little mini subcontract within our larger contract. And it allows a great deal of control for us and also allows us to control quality as well as cost throughout the project. Because if something's not going quite as we anticipated, we can take a week or so and say, let's sit down and have a conversation about how we're going to change things for the next month before we approve this next month's work order authorization. So I know that's a lot of details. I'll just kind of wrap up with a couple final comments here. Paul alluded to it earlier, but we've really worked extensively with Paul, Charisse, and all the other staff at Speech to put you guys in a position to succeed on this. And I'm just really grateful and encouraged by the partnership to date, and the support from the leadership at your board has been phenomenal. And I look forward to playing a role in the success and improving your services through this process moving forward. I would be happy to entertain any questions that the group might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Are there any questions from any of our board members?
Hi, this is Holly. Thanks for that great report. I'm wondering, in the incremental rollout, do you have any information on the priorities of what will be rolled out first, second, third?
We haven't baselined that entirely yet, but in discussions with Paul, and he can chime in as well here, that priority is set based on the business priority. And I think kind of in our early planning discussions, while this is not set in stone, there's an emphasis on online, turning on more transactions online, and thinking about strategically doing it for specific types of license types first, and then focusing on the others as we move forward. But Paul, I'd be happy if you wanted to take part of this as well.
Yes, I think, as we look at the workload and what we're trying to accomplish, as Sean mentioned, we're looking at trying to get the most out of some of these beginning stages. For instance, online services and licensing. We have different licensing populations, so we might start with the largest population first and then work our way through them. But the emphasis has been dealing with licensing in the very beginning as far as the functionality of this product. Did that answer your question, Holly?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on the business modernization project? I know it's a lot of information. As you can imagine, this touches on so many things, even just in some of the discussion there, what Sean was referring to. We're talking about licensing, contracts, admin, IT, even all the way to going before legislative committees. So there's a lot involved here, and I just want to thank everybody involved for getting us to the point that we are, and we look forward to an end product that will be beneficial to our consumers and our licensees and applicants. If there are no questions, thank you again, Sean. If there are no questions, I'm going to go through the rest of my report. If you are following along my report, the next item I want to talk about was our board office relocation. This has been in the planning for some time. I want to say we started talking about this probably almost 5 years ago. So it's taken us some time to get to where we found the right location and we're able to make this work. But we're really proud and happy to announce that we have moved to our new location. We're located now at 1601 Response Road in Suite 260 in Sacramento. That, if you're familiar with Sacramento, is still somewhat in the same area that we're in right now. We're close to Cal Expo. This new facility that we have is much more adequate to what we're trying to accomplish and is able to, if you ever visited our former board office, you would know that it was this kind of long rectangular office space that was designed for a time when the board had, fewer staff and fewer licensees, probably early on when the hearing aid dispensers had just come on to be part of the board. So we have grown quite a bit, as our numbers will show, as our staffing is shown, and we have been planning this for some time. So we were able to move during the month of April. We're still even doing some unpacking as we speak, but we're very happy, and we look forward to a time when all of you can come and visit our new office. I just want to talk a little bit about all of the different things that the board office has been taking on, and just want to ask for your patience and understanding as we have gone through this pandemic. There has been a lot of shuffling and a lot of juggling on management's part. So it's been challenging, and now, as I reported in the last meeting, we had just reopened back in February. Our board office is still being staffed on a rotational basis, but we're getting more and more of our staff back into the office and trying to keep up with the workload and some of these other projects that were already in the planning. We have one vacancy right now for legislation and regulations. As Sean mentioned, we had some other BCP work that's being done in association with the project of business modernization. So we want to try to keep up with our work and try to also staff that project and the growth that is happening. Any questions so far before I start talking about our budget? I'll go on to B, which is our budget report. And we have a budget report, or what is actually an expenditure report, behind that first yellow divider. And that report reflects fiscal activity through March 31st. This is based on data that's provided by the DCA Budgets Office, and they work with us on making sure that we're on track to not go over our budget and to have enough to get us through the year. If you look at that budget report, what it is it's a detailed, itemized sheet that shows us every category that we have budgeted and what we're spending. The very last group of columns reflects the current fiscal year, 2021, and then the columns before that are previous years. So you can see, if you follow that, what the expenses have been in the past and where we are now. If you look at current year expenditures, which is the blue column, and projections to year end, which is a column, 2 columns down to the right. The important thing to look at here is what our projection is getting towards the year end. So if you look at fiscal year 2021, our governor's budget is almost $2.5 million. In the green column, it shows you our projections to year end, which is about 2.3 million. And our projection of what we're going to have left over at the end of the year, which is approximately $27,000, with a surplus of about 1%. That's actually less than what we typically have reverted. This money goes into our speech language, pathology, audiology, and hearing aid dispensers fund. But this is less than what we have typically reverted. And one of the reasons is the more work the board is doing, the more money that we're spending. And we've had a lot going on. So we will watch our budget closely, and we'll make sure that we stay on track and make any necessary adjustments. The next item in my report is a regulations report. And
Paul, can I just ask a question here?
Yes, please.
This is Marcia. I was just wondering, I was just looking at the travel in state at $6,300 approximately. Since COVID has kind of kept us all from traveling anywhere, I'm just wondering where that money is going.
You're talking about the overage?
No, just under
Yes.
current year expenditures under travel in state. I'm just wondering what goes into that value of 6,000, since we haven't been able to travel much at all?
Yes, and there are still other individuals that are associated with our board that use travel, and that would be taken out of our travel budget. For instance, we have examiners and subject matter experts that have worked on workshops during the year, examiners that have helped us conduct exams, because even though our board office has been shut down much of the year, we have made adjustments to continue having practical exams. And I'll ask Sharice Burns if there's anything else that I'm missing as far as what would come out of our travel item.
This is Sharice. That would be it. So examiners and including Office of Professional Examination Services workshop travel. So there have been a few of those that do still require travel that have happened, and then any of the examiner travel as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And just like our checking account at home or our personal accounts, you know, if you may not spend money in one area, but there may be areas that you go over another area. So you'll see that there's some red in the area of unencumbered balance, and there's some black. So the hope is that, you know, we keep it all within the black at the bottom line there. But that's a great question, Dr. Raggio. Are there any other questions on the budget before I go on? So item C is you see a table there that kind of reflects the pending rulemaking files that are either in the initial review process or the rulemaking process with the Office of Administrative Law. I'm happy to announce that the AB2138 criminal conviction, substantial relationship, and rehabilitation criteria, those regs were a result of Assembly Bill 2138 and were a priority for the board. They were, you know, bumped in front of every other rulemaking file that we were working on. And we were just told that our regulations were adopted just a few days ago. So we're really pleased with that. We have a few others that are in the works here. Our fee increase, our RPE direct supervision requirements that we're working on. These are regs that have been noticed. And then the last one there's a lot of text in that, but you can see that we have approved language. I want to also make something clear because the board has approved language for other work that we are doing, but that if that's not on this list, that means that we haven't started the process by putting out that initial notice. So if you don't see it here, it's not because we've forgotten about it. It's just because we haven't started the work with that. It's also important when the board approves language that everyone understands that there's still a pretty detailed and long process with the Office of Administrative Law. And it's not until it gets to that point that it actually becomes adopted and codified in regulation. The next section of my report is our licensing report. And this is just a table that I like to provide to give us a snapshot. It's not perfect, but what it does is it just kind of shows us where we are today and allows us to kind of take the pulse on our licensing workload. I've been doing this for several years, and what this shows us is that, you know, we have kind of stayed in a peak season and a kind of high level of workload during the year, partially due to our staffing, but also the flow of license applications that has come in has just been pretty steady. And instead of getting that one big spike, it's been pretty steady throughout the year. But we also put this information on our website. We're trying to make, you know, every effort we can to let applicants know how long it is taking for the board to process their applications. And these are numbers that reflect completed applications that come in which we have all of the information that we need. Section E of my report is our practical examination report. I want to commend staff because during this time, as I've mentioned before, we have been able to conduct practical examinations. We've had some examiners, subject matter experts that have been great and have, really stepped up to help us during this time. I know that we need examiners throughout the year. We can always use that. The more examiners we have, the more examinations we can conduct. But we have done a really good job considering the, all of the issues that have worked against us to continue with the practical examination. During the pandemic, again, as I've mentioned in the past, Charisse and staff were able to conduct these examinations in a very large room that provided for, the appropriate distancing. There was a lot of cleaning and sanitizing going on as people were coming in and out of that room. Our new offices will allow us to have examinations in-house. So we have 2 examination rooms that are part of our new office, and I think that that's going to allow us to continue conducting steady examinations. The next item on my report is just the enforcement report. And I want to, before I go to the enforcement report, I want to direct you to the second divider, which is the licensing statistics. And behind that divider, you can see a chart that shows you the total number of licenses issued to date. This shows you our numbers for the last 6 years and our current year. So you could see that every year we issue anywhere from 36 to 3,800 licenses, and it shows you the different categories of license that we issue. Most boards don't have this many license types. We have, quite a few. So our staff have to understand all the different requirements, and they have to understand a little bit more than most licensing analysts at DCA. If you look at the table underneath licenses issued, that shows you licensing population. And the real interesting thing to see here, especially for some of our newer members, is the numbers. If you look at, for instance, fiscal year 15, 16, just 5 years ago, we were over 22,000 in the number of licensees that were under the board's purview. Over the years that has increased. Today we are at 36,000. So along with that increase in our licensing population is the increase in our workload. And the priorities change. So it's our job to make sure that we prioritize that workload and do some of the things that, that are most important first. Which leads us to enforcement. I want to, behind the next yellow divider is our enforcement report. And this is broken down. The first section there is complaints and convictions. And you can see that the number of complaints and convictions that have come in this year have decreased. During this same period of time, we've continued to work these complaints. We've issued 1 citation this year for unlicensed activity and not cooperating with board investigation. There are currently about 10 discipline cases that are pending with the Attorney General's office. Those are cases that are currently being worked or litigated. In addition to that, the board is currently monitoring 19 probationers, for which 3 require drug and alcohol testing and 6 are in hold status. If you go back to my report under section F, you'll see a table, and that table shows you the disciplinary actions that have been adopted by this board during the past 12 months. These are listed in chronological order. As Tanisha Ashford has communicated with you on updates of some of the disciplinary actions that have been taken, I want to point out that also included here are voluntary surrenders of license and default revocations. A voluntary surrender of license can be approved by the executive officer, and the default revocation can also be approved. And A default decision is when a respondent does not respond to the board's accusation or does not show up to their hearing. Those can both result in default decisions. That's the end of the information in my report. Are there any questions from any of our board members?
This is Marcia. I have a question.
Yes.
Under quarter 3 for the enforcement report, it still combines speech pathology and audiology. And I thought we were going to make an effort to try to separate those, but not seeing that on the report. Can you tell us under complaints received, there are 42 during that quarter? Can you break it down for me in terms of how many are speech pathology, how many are audiology?
Yes, I could talk a little bit about that. So one of the, first let me go back to the way the system collects data. It's separated into 2 accounts. The only reason that it's separated into 2 accounts is because when the hearing aid dispensers bureau came on to the board, those systems were not merged because that would have required another project to turn them into one. So the databases continued to be 2 separate databases. So we actually work out of 2 different databases. That's the only reason that the information is separated the way it is. If we didn't have that, we would probably just have one lump sum number of what the complaints received are. So what we did talk about was at the end of the year, we will break it down and provide a report that kind of shows a breakdown of speech and audiology so that board members can kind of know what the difference is. I can't tell you what the breakdown is as far as speech and audiology. I know that the majority of those are going to be on the speech language pathology side just because of the difference in numbers. There's a much larger percentage of speech language pathologists, assistants, and RPEs. So did you want any other information other than the numbers as far as the percentage, or were you talking about the types of complaints that come in?
Not necessarily the types, although that is
Okay.
an important thing too, but I thought you had sent me a slide that showed the breakdown for audiology, and it was a relatively small number relative to 42, but that's all I wanted to know is you are going to do an end of the year separation of those 2 things so we can really know not only what types, who's making these violations, but what types of violations, so we can hopefully work with the professional organizations to curb some of that behavior.
Yes, and the slide that Dr. Rajo is referring to is a slide that shows the type of enforcement work that we do, and it's for the purpose of outreach. When I'm presenting to licensee groups, I like to talk about enforcement and talk about the types of complaints that we get. And those types of complaints vary from license type to license type. So at the next board meeting, we'll be able to compile the statistics and at least break down the numbers that can show how many of the complaints that we get are from speech language pathology, how many are from audiology.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I see Sharice Burns has her hand raised.
Yes, I just wanted to mention also it also would be a good idea for the enforcement ad hoc committee to also take a look at the statistics and data that the board is reporting and see if there's more valuable ways to present our data and so on and so forth. So that might be something that would be good for them to take a look at, so that even though we can pull a lot of different data and slice it up in a lot of different ways, kind of what's the most important for the board to be provided at each board meeting or at the end of each fiscal year, or the same. So that's actually a good idea to have that discussion at that committee as well.
That's
Yeah,
a great point. Yeah, and before I get to Holly's question, I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. These reports that we give you are for your benefit, and we do want to make them so that it's information that you can use. This is a report that we have talked about changing for some time now, so I think that that would be a great thing for the committee to look at. And what Sharice is referring to also is those ad hoc committees that we've talked about. The enforcement committee, we do want, I know we've discussed this in the past, we want every board member at some point to be part of that committee so that they can come and see what our processes are. This is one of the most important things you do as a board member, not the most important. And I think it's really important that you understand the enforcement process too. So understanding the information, the workload, and what is being done is important. Let's look at this report and see if we can improve it. I see Holly Kaiser has a question.
Yeah, thank you. On your report about licenses issued and licensee population, there's one that's 0 throughout the years. I actually don't know what SPT stands for. Can you enlighten me, please?
Yes, that is a speech language pathologist temporary. So it's not common to get a temporary license request because the speech language pathologists have the CCC route to get licensed in this state. So often there's not a need for that.
We have several temporary type of licenses. For instance, the RPE is a temporary license, a hearing aid dispenser trainee. And then we have the traditional temporary licenses Sharice referred to that are for those people that come in from out of state. So yeah, I guess that's one category that we don't use a whole lot of. Are there any other questions? Well, thank you. If there are no other questions, oh, I see Gilda Dominguez has a question.
Good morning. This isn't a question, but just a comment. As a new board member, I would like to thank the board members for the warm welcome. And I'm looking forward to working with everyone regarding our mission, our vision, and our values. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Paul, would you like to entertain any public comment on your report?
Sure.
All right, this is the moderator, and I have opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment on this agenda item, please type "I would like to make a comment" using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists. We are displaying instructions for your reference. All right, this is the moderator. I see no requests for public comment at this time. Madam Chair, would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you.
All right, it's closed.
Okay, thank you for that report. I'd like to suggest that we continue with one more agenda item before we take a bio break. I hope that's okay with everyone. I would like to introduce the next topic and our guest today. Mr. Brian Clifford is going to give us the DCA update on the board and bureau relations. Mr. Clifford is the senior manager for planning and implementation at the state of California. He is part of the executive office of the Department of Consumer Affairs. So, Mr. Clifford, welcome.
Thank you. I just want to make sure everyone can hear me.
I can hear you.
Wonderful. Good morning, board chair and members. I'm Brian Clifford with the Department of Consumer Affairs. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity to provide a department update to your board. First off, I would like to welcome Gilda Dominguez as the newest member of the board. Congratulations on your appointment and thank you for your willingness to serve. And on behalf of the department, I'd also like to thank former member Dee Parker for her dedicated service to the board and for her commitment to protecting California consumers. The first item I'd like to talk about is COVID-19. It's affected every aspect of our work for more than a year. Thank you to Executive Officer Sanchez and to board staff who have been working so hard to maintain excellent customer service throughout these challenging times. DCA offices remain open with preventative measures to safeguard the health and safety of our employees and visitors. Boards and bureaus are looking ahead to what changes can be made permanent for efficiency and employee well-being, such as telework and eliminating paper processes. I encourage all members and the public to visit DCA's COVID-19 webpage for updates and resources on the state's reopening plan, public health guidance, vaccinator resources, vaccine distribution, and more. DCA is receiving many questions about when and how boards will be able to meet again in person. I don't have a definitive answer today, but would like to offer some clarification. As you know, the ability of the board to meet remotely is tied to the governor's executive orders and the state of emergency. When these are lifted, the board will be required to follow all aspects of the Open Meetings Act, including publicly noticed and accessible locations. We do not know yet when this will happen or if any changes in the law might occur before that. DCA will do all it can to assist the boards and bureaus to transition safely and with enough time to plan for in-person meetings. While we continue to meet remotely, should your board be interested in doing video meetings, DCA has created a video background with the DCA logo that board members can use. If you're interested in this and would like your board's logo added to the graphic, please let us know, and our communications team would be happy to provide you with that. The next item I want to talk about was appointments. It's one of our top priorities in board and bureau relations, and I would like to provide a brief overview. Currently, the board has 3 vacancies: an audiologist, a hearing aid dispenser, and a public member appointed by the governor. DCA and all the appointing authorities share the goal of a fully seated, diverse, and effective board. Filling current and upcoming vacancies is a priority. That being said, if any members know any great candidates, or if any members of the public attending the meeting are interested in serving, please find the link titled Board Member Resources on DCA's homepage to apply for an appointment. For current board members, 2021 is a mandatory sexual harassment prevention training year. This means all employees and board members are required to complete the training during this year. As a reminder, newly appointed and reappointed board members are required to attend board member orientation training within a year of appointment or reappointment. DCA is excited about the new and improved training, which has been updated based on board member feedback and requests. The next training will be held on June 23rd via WebEx. To register, please visit the DCA Board Members Resource Center on DCA's website. And finally, I'd like to update you on 2 new exciting initiatives launched by DCA's director in 2021 to enhance DCA services to all boards and bureaus. The first is an executive officer cabinet. This group of board and bureau executives has been formed to maintain regular communication, provide feedback and information to DCA, and assist with special projects that impact all boards and bureaus. The group has met several times and is making progress on projects such as standardizing board reporting requirements. The second is the Enlighten Licensing Project. This work group is helping individual boards and bureaus streamline and make their licensing processes more effective and efficient by utilizing best practices, information technology, and cost-saving measures. The work group has begun a deep dive into the licensing processes at the Board of Registered Nursing, with process improvements being implemented in real time. We will continue to update you on these initiatives as they progress. As always, Board and Bureau Relations is here to help, and if there's anything we can do to assist, please just let us know. This concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to turn it back over to the chair.
Okay, I'd like to ask if there are any board member questions regarding Mr. Clifford's report. Gil, did you have your hand up, or is that from before? I would just like, I'm sorry.
No
Go
question. No question. Thank you.
Okay. I'm just curious about a couple of things. How long would you say it's taking to fill appointments once applications come in? Do you look for a certain number of them? What is the process, and how long is it taking to get a new appointment to a board?
I think it varies depending on the board and the situation. I don't know that there's a standard time for that. And obviously it would also depend on how many applicants for people that are interested in the appointments.
You have a ballpark?
Unfortunately, I don't. I don't think there's a standard amount of time in terms of how quickly those get filled.
Okay, we're always worried about a quorum here because we have several vacancies. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to say we always are monitoring board membership on all the boards to make sure that as those quorum issues become a higher risk, that those are elevated and the folks that need to know are aware of that.
Okay, that's good to know. Could I just verify something you said? Did you say that the new member orientation, if that's the right title, is June 23rd, the next one?
Yes.
Okay. Do any other board members have questions or comments about Mr. Clifford's report? Seeing none, I would like to open the floor for public comment or questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to make a comment on this agenda item, please type "I would like to make a comment" in the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists. We are displaying instructions for your reference. This is a moderator and Madam Chair. I see no requests for public comment at this time. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
Okay, it's closed.
So I'd like to recommend that we take a bio break till about 10:20, if that would be okay with everyone. So hearing no complaints, I guess that would be okay. Can you set the clock for us, moderator?
Yes, we'll set the clock and post the time.
Okay, thank you. We're going to have a small change in the amendment to the agenda. We're going to have some individuals come on who will be our guest speakers for item number 12, and they won't be available till about 11. So we are going to move ahead to agenda item number 13, update on speech and hearing related DCA waivers related to COVID-19 state of emergency. I'd like to turn it over to Sharice Burns, and hopefully Mr. Clifford is still here, who might be able to also assist with some information. Sharice, are you here?
Yes, thank you, Dr.
Excellent.
Raggio. So as most everyone is aware, during the COVID-19 pandemic, the state of emergency declared by the governor has allowed us to do waivers of some of our licensure requirements. Outside of those waivers, of course, the board can't just waive its regulatory requirements, and definitely not statutory either. So some of those include the continuing education requirement waiver. That extends the requirement. So essentially you have more time to meet the CE requirements. It does not change the CE requirements. We have had quite a few questions about that. So there is still a live requirement for the CE. It is just delayed through the waivers. So again, you have more time to accrue those hours, but the mixture of them are still the same. And then we also still have the reactivation requirement that is waived through July 1st of 2021. We have the direct monitoring requirements and direct supervision, which allows telesupervision of speech language pathology assistants and RPE, required professional experience licensees. That is still in effect. It is currently now through June 30th. We also have the modification for limitations on renewing hearing aid dispenser temporary license and hearing aid dispenser trainee licenses. That is also extended through June 30th. the modifications for limitations on requirements for extending RPE so that they can be extended beyond the one extension. That was also that waiver was also renewed, and it is good through June 30th. Again, the board tried for a couple other ones, including the modification of the 12-month full-time experience requirement for audiologists. That waiver was denied. And the board subsequently tried to get a modification of the self-study restrictions for CE, and that was also denied. So those were not able to get. Of course, we've been working collaboratively with DCA to ensure that waivers are extended during the pandemic, but that we will also be working together to unwind waivers over the next few months as the governor opens up the state and then eventually rescinds the state of emergency orders that are currently in place. So it probably won't be an immediate cutoff, but we'll be looking to unwind those in the next few months. So people should be aware of that. Just kind of keep that in mind. At this point, we're not asking for any new waivers. I think we've kind of gotten those that we needed to get through the pandemic. And so now we are just kind of keep an eye out on the current waivers and how long we need to have them extended for, and then kind of working with DCA on how they unwind these over the next few months. Are there any questions?
This is Marcia. I was just wondering if you could give us an example of one of these waivers and how might it be unwound, so to speak. And are you saying the DCA is going to unwind these as opposed to the board staff?
Yes, board staff actually don't have any power to unwind these.
I see.
Yeah, so this is all, the director is given the authority through the governor's executive order, and so it's essentially DCA's prerogative on how to unwind them. I would assume as the state is reopened and restrictions are removed, that slowly those requirements will start to go away as we see no restrictions on public gatherings. Maybe later this year, I would assume maybe the CE requirement will slowly start to be unwound to where it might be extended one or two more times is my guess. I'm just throwing that out there as an idea, and then it would no longer be extended since people can now go to live events and live events can start being scheduled again. But I would put a caveat on here and remind everyone that live means also live interactive CE. So anytime that it's online but it's interactive with the participants or the presenter, that's considered live as well. Just like Kasha's live conference this year is also considered live. So we just want to keep that in mind as well.
Looking at the documents under this tab, it looks like, do they extend these waivers, or have they been extending them every 2 months or so, or is it quarterly?
It seems to be on a 60-day cycle, seems to be the preference.
Yeah, okay.
So it's kind of every 2 months. I think there was one, the CE one got off by a month. I'm not completely sure why, but it was extended through May this time, so April and May. So that should be good now. So they're back on the 60-day. I know the one for reactivations was a longer extension, and that one probably I would guess might unwind sooner because as we're needing less healthcare professionals for the COVID-19 pandemic response, then you won't need to waive the reactivation requirements for much longer.
I don't know if Mr. Clifford would like to chime in on this topic or not.
This is Brian
Yeah.
Clifford. Well, and as an example of maybe how something might be unwound, the continuing education one might be an example where folks have a waiver and are able to renew without doing CE. At some point in time, I think there'll be a cutoff of that, and so that stuff our OIS staff might be putting together that would require now individuals to check, yes, I have done CE in order to renew. And so that's something DCA would handle. And then licensees would have to be back in compliance with that.
Okay, thank you. Can I just ask a general question, Mr. Clifford, how the state looks at any CDC recommendations that come down? Does the state follow those, or do we look at our own statistics and our own situation and not really follow what the CDC is recommending?
That's a little over my head.
Oh, sorry, it
I'm
was
sure
inappropriate.
I'm sure that the Department of Public Health is looking at things like that when taking in consideration their decisions.
And
So
then
yeah,
you take your cues from them.
yeah, we're following direction given by the administration. Yeah.
Okay.
And I would suggest the CDC's recommendations also give deference to state and local jurisdictions. So as the Department of Public Health and OSHA and the rest give out requirements, that would also dictate what has to be done in offices, at the board, and then kind of in this state.
Makes sense. Are there any other questions, comments about item number 13 from the board?
Oh, in the absence of any other questions, I do want to remind anybody that's listening or watching afterwards that we do have listservs that send out notifications regarding the COVID-19 waivers. And if you go to our website, www.speechandhearing.ca.gov, up at the top of the screen, there's a little yellow bar that says not getting COVID-19 related waiver updates from the board, ? Update your email address with the board. And if you click on that link and send us your email address, we'll make sure we have it updated in our system, just in case we have an old email address or no email address for you. That way you're getting a COVID-19 related waiver update as soon as we are able to send them out.
Could you repeat that, where that location is to submit that?
Absolutely. So on our website, www.speechandhearing.ca.gov, at the very top of the webpage, the third yellow line has a not getting COVID-19 related waiver updates from the board ? On that line, you'll see a link that says update your email address with the board. Email us here. And if you click on that, it'll open up an email for you in whatever email system you're using to send to our speech and hearing at dca.ca.gov so that you can update your email address, and we'll go ahead and update our listservs that send out the emails about COVID-19 related waivers.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to ask at this point if there are, oh, Paul.
Yes, I just wanted to just kind of echo what Sharice Burns is saying. For those of you that are listening or following along, we have some people from our professional associations I know that are listening, and this has been a great effort in collaboration with some of those folks from the different organizations that have worked with us. But I just want to make sure that you're telling your members to go to our website first and look for that information. Sharice Burns and our staff have put information out there, FAQs, and we will continue putting that out there so that people are updated on what direction we go with these waivers. DCA also has their own COVID waiver page. So I just want to put that commercial out there to make sure that people know to go to our website for this information. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, not seeing any other board questions or comments, I'd like to ask for any public comment on this item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment on this agenda item, please type. I would like to make a comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists. We are displaying instructions for your reference. All right, we have a Linda Pippert who would like to make a comment. And I'll let you know when you've been unmuted. You'll have 3 minutes with the 30-second warning. And Linda, you've been unmuted.
Thank you. Yeah, this is Linda Pippert. I'm a speech language pathologist and the media past chair of CASHA. And I certainly thank Sharice and Paul and the folks even at DCA on helping us get the word out on these different waivers. And we are sending people. So when CASHA is sending out links, we're making sure that it includes the link for them to go to the licensing board website, that they're not just taking an edited version for us. So thank you so much for making that available to everyone. I think my one comment that I'm hearing from the field on concerns for continuing the waivers is that in the fall, we already are hearing that some parents are probably not going to let their kids go back to school. And so an RPE might have a caseload that some of the kids are done virtually, some of them are done live. So I'm certainly emphasizing that we don't have the expectation that we'll have a waiver in the fall, and that supervision of RPE supervisors, we should expect that it's going to be done live. So we're making those kinds of plans, but there is concern there out in the community, should the waiver for telesupervision go away, that maybe that supervision requirement is going to be a little bit more difficult to meet. My hope is that there's enough kids live that they would get hours of live supervision. And then certainly if they need to do extra supervision hours to catch those students that are still virtually, that would be kind of over and above hours, but they would still meet the letter of the regulations. So that's my comment. And again, thank you so much for working on these.
You're very welcome.
All right, this is a moderator and I see no further requests for public comment. Madam Chair, would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
Okay, it's closed.
Okay, I see that, I thought I saw that Ms. Castro is here, but I don't know if her host speaker is with her.
Dr. Rajo, we're going to go to actually item 18 on the agenda next.
Okay. All right, so we are going to move to item number 18. This is the regulatory report, update, review, and possible action on board regulation packages. I'd like to turn this over to Heather Olivares to lead this discussion.
Good morning, board members. Heather Olivares, Legislation and Regulation Analyst for the board. I have updates on 2 regulatory packages that have been going through the formal regulatory process with OAL. The first package is the fee regulations. The board initially posted this regulatory proposal for a 45-day comment public period on August 7th, 2020, and that posting starts the 1-year formal rulemaking process with a deadline to submit the completed rulemaking package to OAL by August 6, 2021. We have already met that deadline. We submitted our package on August 7th, 2021. Normally, OAL has 30 working days to review and approve regulations. However, due to COVID-19, there is currently a waiver in place that extends this time frame to 120 days. So at this time, the board is still waiting for OAL to complete this review. The second package is the AB2138 regulations, and the board initially posted this regulatory proposal for a 45-day comment period on March 6, 2020. Our deadline to submit the completed package to OAL was March 5th, 2021. We did meet that deadline, and as Paul Sanchez previously announced, OAL recently approved this regulatory proposal, and it was effective as of May 7th, 2021. So we have successfully completed this regulatory proposal, and that is now current law. Are there any questions with my report?
Looks like Paul has his hand up.
Sorry, I need to take my hand down there. Thanks.
Okay, are there any questions from board members? Seeing none, do we have any public comment on this update?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have opened up the Q&A panel. If any members of the public would like to comment on this agenda item, please type "I would like to make a comment" using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists. We are displaying instructions for your reference. All right, Madam Chair, I see no requests for public comment at this time. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, it's been closed.
Okay, we're going to do a little jumping around here again, trying to meet our time certain at 11 o'clock for our guest speakers. So I'd like to move to item number 16 on the agenda, discussion and possible action regarding required professional experience, direct supervision requirements, and remote or telehealth supervision. And I believe, again, Heather Oliveros is going to lead this discussion.
Correct. The board reviewed and approved this regulatory proposal at the February 20th, 2020 meeting. However, in preparing the required regulatory documents in order to start the formal rulemaking process, board staff identified necessary changes to the definition of required professional experience. Specifically, the current definition of required professional experience includes an inaccurate reference to the requirement for applicants to submit evidence of supervised professional experience. Additionally, the definition doesn't currently include a reference to Business and Professions Code Section 2532.25, which provides the licensure requirements for audiologists that became effective January 1, 2008, when a doctorate degree became required for the practice of audiology. So I'd like you to look in your packet to the following pages after my memo, which has the changes to the regulatory text on page 1. You'll see the required professional experience definition is being amended to mean the supervised practice of speech-language pathology or audiology for the purpose of meeting the requirements for licensure in accordance with sections 2530.5 subdivision F, 2532.2 subdivision C, and 2532.25 subdivision B2 of the code and these regulations. And just to provide some context of what these sections are, the first section, 2530.5 subdivision F, authorizes the full scope of practice for RPEs practicing under the supervision of a speech-language pathologist or audiologist. The second section, 2532.2D, was an inaccurate reference to the exam licensing requirements, and instead we are amending this to reference the correct section, which is 2532.2C, which is proof of supervised experience for speech-language pathologists and audiologists prior to 2008. And then the new section being added, 2532.25B2, requires proof of supervised experience for audiologists after 2008 when a doctoral degree became required. So those are the changes. On the following page 2, you will see some additional text in red, but that's just referencing the sections of law that we are referencing in making this regulation. That's basically our authority to make this regulation in the first place. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Or if in reviewing the text you see that there are additional changes that should be made, please bring them up. Otherwise, we do need a formal motion to approve this regulatory text.
Can I ask for comments, questions from the board first? Seeing none, I'd like to open this up for public comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment on this agenda item, please type "I would like to make a comment" using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists. We are displaying instructions and we'll give you a moment. All right, this is the moderator. I see no requests for public comment at this time. Madam Chair, would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, it's closed.
Okay, I would like to entertain a motion to accept these regulatory the technical changes to the regulatory language from, yes, on the board.
This is Todd. I move to accept the changes.
Thank you. Is there a second?
This is Holly. I second.
Okay. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, Charisse, could I impose on you to call the vote?
Absolutely. Dr. Raju,
Aye.
Ms. Kaiser,
Aye.
Mr. Borges,
Aye.
Ms. Chang,
Aye.
Ms. Dominguez,
Aye.
Ms. Snow.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay. Thank you, Heather. I'm not sure where we're going just yet. We do have our two speakers in attendance at this point. Not sure if they're ready to go forward or if we should move on to another agenda item. Paul?
Yes, Dr. Raju, we are ready now to go to agenda item number 12.
Okay, great. All right, item number 12 is an overview of the disciplinary process, Health Quality Enforcement Section, Attorney General's Office. And I believe Mr. Sanchez will introduce our speakers.
Yes, we're very pleased to have with us today two individuals who work very closely with the board in the area of enforcement. As you all know, consumer protection is the highest priority of the board, and the work that we do can sometimes lead all the way through the adjudication process into administrative discipline. Since I've come to the board, I have been working with Gloria Castro, who serves as a Senior Assistant Attorney General for the Department of Justice. And Gloria, oversees a great deal of work with consumer affairs. She has a very important job there. She has been there for some time, and I believe in 2010 she was appointed by the then Attorney General and now Vice President Kamala Harris. Ms. Castro is the type of person that makes time to work with any issue that we might have. She treats us as, an important client in everything that we do. So we really appreciate working with her. In 2016, Rose Luzon came to the Department of Justice, having worked in the private sector, and even in the private sector, she did some consumer protection work. Since she's been with DOJ, she took on the role, one of her many jobs that she does is she serves as a liaison to the Speech Language Pathology, Audiology, and Hearing Aid Dispensers Board. So we've talked to them in the past, and the Gloria has come in the past and presented with our DAG liaison. This is going to be the first time that Rosemary Luzon presents to us, but we wanted them to provide us with an overview. this is a somewhat high-level overview of the disciplinary process, but this is a good opportunity for us to ask questions of them and to learn about what we do from their perspective and talk about the different roles. So without any further delay, I hand it over to them. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so very much, Paul, for that wonderful introduction and everything you just said about me. I mirror back to you. This board is so lucky to have Paul at the helm. I do enjoy speaking to Paul with a lot of frequency on all the important issues that are raised either in our cases, through the public, and through our esteemed board members. And so without further ado, I will have Deputy Attorney General Luzon go ahead and present her slides. We will have an opportunity for questions at the end. And really, it's my opportunity also to be able to answer any questions I can answer today. And to the extent I cannot, I will definitely look forward to another invitation or relay that through your staff counsel and Paul for dissemination to the board in any respect that you wish. Thank you very much, Paul. And again, we feel very, very lucky and honored to serve this board and your important mission.
Thank you, Gloria. Thank you, Paul. This is Rose Luzon, Deputy Attorney General. I am honored to be before all of you this morning. Gloria and I are immensely grateful for the opportunity to present this training to you on the disciplinary process. If I may ask for the opportunity to share my screen, I'll go ahead and upload the PowerPoint slide.
Thank you, Rosemary. This is the moderator, and I will change your role to presenter. All right, you may now choose the option to share your screen.
Thank you. Okay, I hope you all see the initial slide of our presentation. It is the overview of the disciplinary process. May I just confirm that you are able to see it?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I want to start by giving all of you a brief roadmap of what we will be covering today during this training. We will begin by providing an overview of the guiding principles and laws governing the board's enforcement and disciplinary work. Then we will move on to a discussion of the stages of the disciplinary process, from the investigation of possible unprofessional conduct to the assessment of potential enforcement, to the filing of formal charges, and to the hearings and decisions that result. And finally, as Ms. Castro stated, we'll reserve time for any questions that you may have. I am endeavoring to move to the next slide. I don't know if there's a pause that you all are seeing there. Okay.
You're good.
Great. So Business and Professions Code, Section 2530. This is also known as the Speech Language Pathologist and Audiologist and Hearing Aid Dispensers Licensure Act. Starting at Section 2530 until Section 2539.14, you will find the statutory laws that apply to speech language pathologists, audiologists, and hearing aid dispensers. Foremost among these statutes is Section 2531.02. This statute provides that public protection is the highest priority for the board in exercising its disciplinary and other functions. Importantly, it states, whenever the protection of the public is inconsistent with other interests sought to be promoted, the protection of the public shall be paramount. In addition to the Business and Professions Code, there are additional authorities that guide the board's disciplinary functions. They include the California Code of Regulations and the board's disciplinary guidelines. For hearing aid dispensers, the applicable Code of Regulations can be found at Title 16, Division 13.3. There you will find the regulations that concern enforcement. For speech-language pathologists and audiologists, the regulations pertaining to enforcement are found at Title 16, Division 13.4. For all three licensee groups, the regulations instruct that the disciplinary guidelines shall be considered by the board in reaching its decision on discipline. The guidelines also instruct that it's appropriate for the board to deviate from the disciplinary guidelines in exercising its discretion if it finds that the particular facts of the case warrant deviation from the guidelines, such as, for example, if there are mitigating factors that are present. When considering the disciplinary guidelines, it is always important to keep in mind the dictates of Business and Professions Code Section 2531.02. That is, that public protection is the board's highest priority. This takes us to the disciplinary process and its various stages. The first stage is the investigation. The investigation is conducted by the Division of Investigation, also known as D of I, which is a division that falls within the Department of Consumer Affairs. The investigation begins when a complaint is received. It's then reviewed by the board staff and then referred to D of I for investigation. Evidence is gathered, meaning documents are obtained, witnesses are interviewed, and the licensee who is the subject of the investigation is also interviewed. Once all relevant evidence is gathered, an expert is retained by the board. The expert's role is to objectively review the evidence and to provide an opinion as to whether or not unprofessional conduct has taken place. The next stage of the disciplinary process is the referral of the case to the Attorney General's office to conduct a legal review of the case. The Attorney General's office exists within the California Department of Justice. And within the AGO, there is our section, the Health Quality Enforcement section. The Deputy Attorneys General, otherwise known as DAGs, within HQE, serve as the board's prosecutors. In the board's cases, we represent the complainant, who in our cases is the board's executive officer, Mr. Sanchez. Once the case is referred to the Attorney General's office, HQE undertakes the next step of the disciplinary process, and that is to review and assess the evidence from a legal standpoint. The legal review stage is guided at all times by the standard of proof needed to establish unprofessional conduct. And that standard is clear and convincing proof. The party who carries the burden of proving the standard is the complainant. And the seminal case on the standard of proof in our cases is Ettinger. It's a California appellate court case from 1982 that still stands today. Ettinger underscores that the purpose of discipline in the context of professional licenses is public protection. And so, when seeking to revoke, suspend, or impose other forms of discipline on the license, clear and convincing proof to a reasonable certainty is required to do so. Ettinger repeats this principle of public protection when it states that the purpose of an administrative proceeding concerning revocation or suspension of a license is not to punish the individual. The purpose is to protect the public from dishonest, immoral, disreputable, or incompetent practitioners. This legal standard of proof is the overarching principle that controls HQE's legal review and assessment of the case. Is there clear and convincing evidence to a degree of reasonable certainty to prove that the licensee committed unprofessional conduct? So, what does this standard mean relative to other legal standards of proof that we often hear about? Well, it's much stricter than the preponderance of evidence standard that's common in civil cases that seek a civil remedy, such as in malpractice cases. On the other hand, the clear and convincing standard is less onerous than the standard of proof in criminal cases, where the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, once the legal review step is completed and the determination is that there is clear and convincing evidence of unprofessional conduct, the next step is to prepare the accusation. The accusation is akin to the complaint in civil and criminal cases. In our administrative context, it's the formal pleading that gives notice to the licensee of the unprofessional conduct charges that are being brought against their license. And I'd like to say a brief word about statement of issues. This scenario arises when a person has applied for a license, the application is denied, and the applicant seeks to contest the denial. The statement of issues is therefore the formal pleading that gives notice to the applicant of the charges of unprofessional conduct that serve as the grounds for denying the license application. After the legal review stage, but before the public filing of a formal accusation, there are a few interim important steps worth noting. First, the DAG must make the recommendation to file an accusation. This is done by accepting the case for prosecution. Second, the DAG drafts the accusation, which entails identifying each charge of unprofessional conduct based on the evidence and setting forth in the accusation the factual allegations that support the charge. The proposed accusation is then reviewed by a supervising Deputy Attorney General, also known as an SDAG. And once it is reviewed and approved by the SDAG, the accusation is then sent to the board's executive officer, who again is the complainant in our cases. The executive officer, Mr. Sanchez, reviews the accusation, and if deemed acceptable, he will sign it. At that point, the accusation is served upon the licensee, who is now referred to in the accusation as the respondent, and the accusation is made public online on the Breeze website. Business and Professions Code Section 2533 sets forth the various grounds for unprofessional conduct that can be charged in an accusation. They include quality of care violations, such as gross negligence, repeated negligence, or incompetence. They also include past criminal convictions, fraud or deceit in the obtaining of a license, drug or alcohol-related conduct, such as the self-administration of controlled substances, or the excessive or dangerous use of drugs, alcohol, or both. And they also include dishonest or fraudulent acts. Section 2533 also has additional grounds for unprofessional conduct, and they include acts that endanger public health, welfare, and safety, consumer-related conduct, such as false or misleading advertising or warranty violations, violations of terms and conditions imposed by the board for purposes of probation or conditional licenses. They include a hearing aid dispenser's unauthorized use of the terms doctor, physician, clinic, or audiologist. And they also include prior out-of-state discipline. For unprofessional conduct involving quality of care, it is important to keep in mind that the licensee's conduct is looked at relative to the standard of care for similarly situated practitioners. Specifically, the standard of care is the degree of care that a reasonably prudent practitioner would provide under the same or similar circumstances. Care that deviates from the standard to an extreme degree or to a simple degree of departure can constitute grounds for unprofessional conduct. And such deviation can give rise to charges of gross negligence, repeated negligence, or both, based on the evidence. Once the accusation is filed, the case proceeds to litigation. And the next steps are discovery and possible resolution of the accusation by way of settlement, default, or trial by hearing. We will know how the respondent wishes to proceed in the case because they are required to complete and submit a notice of defense within 15 days of being served with the accusation. Upon receipt of the respondent's notice of defense, the parties will then exchange what's called discovery. Essentially, that is all of the information concerning each side's case, such as documents or witness names. Then a hearing date for trial on the accusation will be set. Before the hearing date, a settlement may be reached to resolve the accusation. If that happens, a proposed settlement is then sent to the board for its consideration and, if appropriate, for adoption. But the settlement is not final and not public until and unless it is formally adopted by the board. There is a different path forward if no notice of defense is submitted by the respondent. Where there is no notice of defense, the respondent has effectively waived their right to a hearing on the merits of the accusation. Alternatively, the respondent might submit a notice of defense, but then ultimately, for some reason, not appear at the hearing. In both scenarios, the case will then move to what's called a default proceeding. And that is where the board is statutorily authorized to take action based on the respondent's express admissions or upon other evidence and affidavits without having to give notice to the respondent. When the board renders its decision on default, the respondent will be served with a default decision, and within 7 days, the respondent may make a written motion to the board requesting that the decision be vacated. The board may then exercise its discretion in that situation to vacate the default decision and to grant respondent a hearing, but it may do so only upon a showing by respondent of good cause. If there is no settlement, if there is no default, then the parties will proceed to the hearing on the accusation. The hearing will take place before an administrative law judge at the Office of Administrative Hearings, also referred to as OAH. The evidence will be presented to the ALJ, including all relevant documents, all witnesses, and the ALJ will then issue a proposed decision. That proposed decision is then sent to the board for its consideration. And the board may do a number of things. It may either adopt the ALJ's proposed decision in its entirety. It may reduce or increase the proposed penalty. The board may make minor or technical changes. It may reject the proposed decision and remand it back to the ALJ to take additional evidence. Or the board may reject the proposed decision altogether. That's called a non-adoption. And in that situation, the board may decide the case upon the record, additional written statements made by the parties, and oral arguments. Afterwards, there may be additional litigation activity, and that may include a petition for reconsideration that's filed with the board, followed by a request for judicial review of the board's decision. So in sum, there are multiple ways to achieve resolution of the accusation, either by hearing, by settlement, or by default. In all of those instances, the result is a formal and final decision of discipline made by the board. So with that, Castro and I would be happy to take any questions that you all might have.
Do any board members have any questions?
Hi, this is Holly. Thank you so much for this presentation. On the second to last slide, disciplinary process, I wasn't sure of the acronym you gave. It was ALJ or AOJ. Can you define that again for me, please?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And thank you for your question. ALJ stands for Administrative Law Judge.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay.
This is Marcia. I'm not quite sure how to ask this, but I wonder if you could speak to something a little more nuanced than these exact rules for disciplinary process. In my years on the board, and looking at a number of cases, a number of board members make comments such as, that doesn't seem so bad. I think I might have done that myself in the past. So I don't think we should punish this person. Of course, that's not our role to punish, but to rehabilitate. So I think we should lessen any kind of disciplinary eventualities that we might impose. I was wondering if you could just speak to that in terms of how the board members should think about the cases that we look at in terms of that kind of thinking.
Absolutely, I'm happy to do so. Thank you for that. I think that the guiding, it always goes back, I think, to the guiding principles and the guiding laws that inform the board's disciplinary work. So first and foremost, I would go back to the mandate statutorily that the board's highest priority is public protection. And so with that as sort of the overarching principle, then we have to look at the legal standard of clear and convincing proof. So that's the legal component of things, as well as the guidance that's provided by the disciplinary guidelines. There are guidelines to be followed with the ability to provide discretion. I think that at all times, those three pillars should guide the board's decision-making. And I think with that, it sort of insulates the process from subjectivity, from personal opinions, and it takes it to more of an objective, necessarily objective perspective and view of how to carry out the work of discipline.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, this is Holly. I have another question. At what point would a DUI trigger this process? Is it after the first one or after two that are close together? How does that work?
A DUI conviction period gives rise under Section 2533 to a possible charges of unprofessional conduct if there is an actual conviction. And so a prior DUI in and of itself, one or multiple, can itself give rise to it. But it also can give rise to the another charge of consuming alcohol or other substances excessively in a way that endangers the licensee, him or herself, others, or the general public. So the existence of a conviction itself gives rise to a charge of unprofessional conduct, regardless of how many.
Thank you.
Sure.
Are there any other questions from board members? I see Todd Borges.
Hi, thank you. Can you speak at all to how the decisions are made for the punishment, whether it's a 3-year suspended license, a 5-year? What type of guidelines do the judges use when determining how long of a suspension of a license?
Thank you for that question as well. The guidelines that the judges or the ALJs are to follow are the same guidelines that the board must follow. And those are the disciplinary guidelines for the hearing aid dispensers, as well as the guidelines for the audiologists and speech language pathologists. So those are the guidelines that all decision makers must follow. The proposed decision makers, which would be the ALJs, as well as the final decision makers, which would be the board. And those guidelines include the guidelines or the recommended or minimum and maximum discipline that should be imposed depending on the charge. So those would actually be set forth in the guidelines themselves. That would be the controlling, if you will, guide for imposing discipline with, as I mentioned earlier, the ability to exercise discretion. That would be the ability of the ALJ in a proposed decision context, as well as the board in a final decision context, to take into account, using its discretion, any factors that may either mitigate or aggravate the proposed discipline in the case.
Hi, this is Karen. Thank you for doing this presentation. I was wondering, is there somewhere written out like that has something like written out what type of guidelines there are? As an example, if you get a speeding ticket, this is the exact fine that you would get. If you something like that. Is there something written out for situations like this?
Not to my knowledge, in that specific sense. Right. So not anything that is specific to specific facts or circumstances of a DUI in your example. But generally speaking, the guidance is in the disciplinary guidelines. It will say in the context of a criminal conviction or conduct that involves alcohol and drugs, there would be guidance there as to what the discipline should be. But again, it's guidance, not requirements. So there's guidance as to what should be the minimal discipline and what should be the maximum discipline. And the board then has the ability to take into account those facts, specific facts that you're talking about, to determine whether or not those facts warrant a mitigation and deviation away from the guidelines or aggravation of the proposed discipline. But the guidelines are really the first, I think, guide or reference point, benchmark, if you will, for determining what the appropriate discipline in the case is. Then the actual specific facts and the circumstances are things that the board would then take into account in its assessment, exercising its discretion of what the discipline is at the end of the day.
And then these disciplinary guidelines are actually, they're in the board regs, correct?
They're actually on the board's website, available on the board's website, and so they are referenced in the board's regs. They're not actually set out in the board's regs, but they're referenced there as something that the board must consider when imposing discipline, and it also provides for the ability to exercise discretion in the imposition of discipline. So it's referenced in the regs, but they're actually, available, physically available on the board's website.
Okay, thank you.
Can I call on Debbie Snow? Oh. Sorry, I didn't know who came first on the hand raise list.
Hi, this is Debbie. Thank you for the presentation. It was great. I did have a question that sometimes when we reject a decision and it goes back, sometimes we're concerned with the time lapse that the practitioner may still be practicing and it's delaying the decision. But at the same time, it's very important to make sure we get it right. How do you weigh that situation? Is there something we should consider?
I think that's you speak to a realistic, if you will, dilemma. The board is looking to act expediently and appropriately with respect to a decision on discipline. On the other hand, that's balanced against the need to provide for due process and the need to provide for the ability for the licensee to have a hearing in due course or a rehearing in due course before there's any discipline that's exacted on that person's license, since it is a property right. And so you speak to, I think, a very important, nuanced issue that is real, and that's, I think, appropriately concerning. I don't know from a practical standpoint what more you can do in terms of facilitating the adjudication or the re-adjudication of that case. The board has done its job by assessing it, by rejecting it, and by requiring for there to be a hearing, if you will, on the underlying charges. And so that process then just has to play itself out. And from the AGO standpoint, we take that responsibility seriously. We will set the matter for hearing if that's the next step that needs to happen as soon as we can. We don't control the timing of that because there is the calendar of the administrative court or the Office of Administrative Hearings, and so we can't dictate necessarily what that timing is going to look like. But we, like the board, act promptly and expeditiously so that there can be an appropriate adjudication of that case. But I think what you are noting is an important, not necessarily conflict, but issue of balancing the need to adjudicate the case expeditiously against also the due process rights of the licensee to have his or her case appropriately and fairly heard in due course.
And we do have some interim actions that can be taken such as Penal Code Section 23 bail recommendations. That arises in the same context as the prior question that Ms. Chang had. To the extent an arrest has relevance to the profession, qualifications, functions, and duties, so a moral turpitude sort of allegation or fraud, those are all things that we rely on licensees to be truthful and reliable in maintaining records that are very important for patients. So Penal Code Section 23 allows our deputies to make a special appearance on behalf of Paul Sanchez and the board to be able to make a recommendation that restrictions be applied to the license to the extent it has a connection or a nexus to protecting the public. And while the guidelines and all that are instructive and our knowledge of what it is that the qualifications, functions, and duties are of each of the professionals, it is oral argument to a criminal judge. To the extent there is a federal crime that is being alleged against a practitioner, and most of those tend to be fraud, we can write a letter to the USAA, the United States attorney, basically, and make a recommendation that their license be restricted within the context of any OR release, on recognizant release, or bail recommendation. And then finally, another interim action that we seldom take advantage of, but when we do, it's very, very serious, and that is from time to time, our clients will become aware through usually colleagues that there are significant mental or organic or psychological or substance abuse issues that a practitioner has not self-identified or the peers are too fearful to bring up, or sometimes it's an employee of the practitioner. So those are all very sensitive issues. We take those seriously. If they do not voluntarily agree, then we will take other actions to examine. It's a very, very serious inquiry, but again, it's public protection, and those things tend to be outside of our direct scope with the board, but ultimately, once those things are either proven to be factors that should come to the board's attention, they can be reduced into an accusation or a surrender or something else that protects the public.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, sometimes there's a concern that the public is in danger while the time is passing. So that's what I was. Thank you for answering that.
And especially with some of our populations that are older, we have a critical interest in trying to capture that testimony as soon as we can and as close as possible to the events in question. So we have an interest to preserve that evidence or those memories. And so that's when we hear from Paul directly. Our liaison's always available on an ad hoc basis to field any question, as am I, and we will find a way to manage that concern as quickly as possible. But like Dag Luzon has discussed, it is a property right. There are due process considerations, but when something is very serious, all boards are empowered through your health and safety and welfare powers that are delegated to you from the people of the state of California, that we undertake those on your behalf to protect the public and the consumers, and ultimately the licensees themselves, right? Some licensees don't have introspection sometimes to limitations, whether they're imposed by drug abuse, age, or health, or stress.
Thank you. That really helped.
Okay, Paul, did you have a question or comment?
I just had a comment. I just wanted to clarify for the board members who are asking about our disciplinary guidelines. Those are included in our Practice Act law books. Depending on which law book you're using, it's Appendix A and B, and it's at the back of the law book. This also gives context to some future work that we're going to be doing in renewing and revising those disciplinary guidelines. It's a lot of work for those of you that have done it, and now you can see just how important that work is. I just wanted to mention that those disciplinary guidelines are in our law book. Thank you.
And Gilda, did you have a comment or question?
Yes, just a comment. Thank you for the presentation. And I just wanted to thank you and tell you that I appreciated the clarity that was provided regarding the board's role, regarding the considerations such as adopting the ALJ decision and or reducing or increasing a penalty, which I can see would happen during any of our discussions, suggesting those technical changes that can be made, or rejecting the proposed decision, and at least in part or in totality. So thank you for the information.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you for inviting us.
Thank you. Paul, I was just wondering if this would be a time when you would like to discuss the process in terms of suspending a license to practice while some aspect of adjudication is occurring. Is this an appropriate time to talk about that?
Yes, and actually, Gloria just touched on that. Gloria, I believe you talked about the PC23 process.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you might want to share with the board? I think it's important to understand we've had instances where we've exercised the PC23 process, and maybe you could just expand on that in interim suspension orders so that everyone understands that.
So, and there's some discussion always in the press about the subjugation of different interests that the public has in protecting itself from predators or licensees or other folks who are not in compliance with the law. Oftentimes, even though these boards have concurrent jurisdiction to proceed on some criminal aspects of the health and safety and welfare regulations and laws that are under your preview to accuse someone of, oftentimes those can have a parallel track in a criminal context, such as in the example that I cited where someone is caught as a defendant in a Medicare program fraud investigation that results in charges. In cases like that, whether they're state or federal, and on the state hand, it would be the Bureau of Medi-Cal Fraud and Elder Abuse. They preserve a lot of the Californians' interest in making sure that Medi-Cal funds are used to the best possible way and are not subject to fraud. To the extent someone is caught up in something like that, and we can see that it's relevant to the qualifications, functions, and duties of their profession, then we can go into court. We will find a Deputy Attorney General to quickly look at the case, contact the Deputy District Attorney or U.S. Attorney, have a discussion with them, and pop in to the criminal court on behalf of Paul Sanchez and this board to give advice to the criminal court judge. Sometimes, depending on the seriousness, let's say it's a sexual abuse or predatory type of practice or allegation, like as in audiology, if somebody's accused of molesting a child, even though it's not the child that is a patient, we would be able to connect that back to protecting the public. In a case like that, we might get a restriction of the license. Only this board has the ability to suspend, but a criminal court can restrict the individual from using their license. And we usually can get that during the pendency of the criminal court hearing. If we can, we will file a placeholder accusation and wait for the criminal case to go first. It does result in some economies such that they go first and their punishment hopefully will result in a lack of liberty and our punishment goes second, which results in a lack of them being able to use their property interest for a stream of income in their profession. When we manage cases like that, it works out really well. We can go ahead and charge on an arrest if we have enough, do a placeholder accusation. These boards do not have statute of limitations, so we're not really worried about that, but it's nice to be able to put something on notice, because where there's one potential victim or one potential act that could impart more patient complaints, then it actually invites patient complaints to this board, and then we have more than what the criminal case has, and we can maybe operate on a parallel track with any patients that have nothing to do with the criminal case, and then get rid of the licensee that way. At the same time, if they're convicted, then that is usually a discussion where we're asking them to surrender their license, or they result in defaults, which is very common. The person has sapped their funds, they know that they're not going to be hired, and they just don't file a notice of defense, and we can get a default. And they may come back to try and get back into the profession, and then it's up to you to decide that. Yesterday, you heard a penalty relief application. That's where you would see that person again, potentially for a petition on reinstatement of their license. On the second part, on interim suspension orders, those are very serious. Those are prosecuted under Government Code Section 11529. Those require a showing that, all things being equal, the administrative law judge would serve the public by going ahead and suspending the license in the interim of an accusation case being resolved. The rub there is that they have a right essentially to a speedy resolution of the accusation matter. And what that means is that when we file an interim suspension order and request the suspension of the license, due process rights allow them to have that case heard as soon as possible. Why? Well, because we have suspended the property right on good evidence, but they have not had their full day in court. An interim suspension order results after a very perfunctory hearing based on declarations and not live testimony. And our DAGs are really great, and they win these. But that also means they have to be ready to go within a very short amount of time. So if you have all your ducks in a row, you have your experts, you have your victims, you probably can go to hearing very quickly. But it's a balance there. We want to make sure that when we file these interim suspension orders, we're ready to go if the respondent wants to have their accusation matter heard as quickly as possible. And they do sometimes go down that track. Other times they don't, and they go ahead and agree that they're going to be suspended, and they take their time to have their day in court under accusations. And last and not least, Department of Consumer Affairs healthcare licensees have a very powerful tool in their tool chest, and that is Business and Professions Code Section 820 ETSEC. And that is those are the statutes that deal with mental illness, whether organic or caused by substance abuse or just substance abuse straight out. Those are the statutes that require that we be able to ask that somebody be ordered to be examined. They can also volunteer. That is somewhat rare sometimes, but sometimes people are interested in volunteering to be examined. At the end of the day, it's a forensic examination conducted by an expert in that field of psychiatry or whatever it is that we are looking at this person for. And based on what they say, then we would be able to apply prosecutorial discretion to that and see where we go with it. And normally we would file an accusation if the ultimate conclusion is that the person is unsafe to practice. The harder ones are, alcohol abuse cases. That is a recognized substance abuse issue, but sometimes an expert, after discussing this issue and examining the licensee, can decide that with treatment they are safe to practice. And that's where rehabilitation and public protection kind of meet. And ultimately, we bring these important decisions to you, the board, to decide what to do with. So hopefully that answered some of the interim actions that we can take to protect the public as soon as possible.
Okay. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Paul. Thank you for that explanation.
Just one other thing, and I probably don't want to get too far into this discussion, but the board also has the ability, when someone violates a Practice Act, we have the ability to file an injunction with the California Superior Court. And we've also worked with the Attorney General's office and have been successful in doing this, or reaching settlements in the process of doing this. So that's also an avenue that we have. I don't know if you want to touch on that at all, Gloria.
Oh, of course, I'd love to. Business and Professions Code Section 17500 has a long and storied history in California. They're essentially private attorney general actions, and they call them that because initially only the attorney general could enjoin these types of practices that are, and there's like about 7 different markers of such a violation of law, but basically anything unfair, unlawful, and specifically with 17500, it's advertising. So the state of California is very interested to make sure that entities such as these boards are able to go into civil court and enjoin violations of law, specifically in advertising that is calculated to defraud people. I have had the pleasure of prosecuting those on behalf of the office, and this board, more than many others, has these types of issues arise from time to time, where it's blatantly clear that there is a full-page ad in a newspaper advertising something that, for those of us that are in the know, just appear to be false. We don't just go on our gut. We do show it to somebody, an expert, or someone that can give us an opinion on whether or not what is being promised is not truthful, misleading, false, untrue. And these enjoining actions can be very powerful, and they can lead to civil penalties. And fortunately, the other aspect of actions like this is that while they are very work intensive, they are calculated to not only stop the behavior through an injunction given by a judge, but are also calculated to operate as a cautionary tale for any other folks who may have wanted to mislead the public and entice them into buying something that is too good to be true. Thank you, Paul. We do that, and thinking of one case in particular in my head, but yes, very important tool. And thank you, Ms. Dominguez, for that question.
Gilda, did you have another question?
Sorry, I took my hand down.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments from board members?
Actually, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, just to the point you just made concerning the illegal advertising. I know one of the potential punishments for that, one of the potential disciplinary guidelines is that they take the written exam, which including license law. And I know this is something that came up in the not too distant past. And then when you look at the disciplinary guidelines in the book, it basically says that essentially they're going to have to retake the written exam as it's already written. Unfortunately, in the written exam, there really aren't any questions about license law. So I'm not understanding necessarily how the disciplinary guideline actually meets the needs of that particular issue.
And that is a good point to make, and I'll dovetail into what Mr. Sanchez has discussed. The disciplinary guidelines are a good opportunity for you to agendize that for further discussion, because if the actual test is no longer meeting that, then you can redraft that and have it go through your regulatory and public hearing process that includes everyone that's impacted in addition to consumers. If it's illusory and it's not calculated to improve the person or rehabilitate or prevent future harms, then that is something we would encourage you to look at, Mr. Borges and board members.
Hi, can I add to that? Just that, yes, I agree. It's something that we need to look at when we're looking at our disciplinary guidelines, but I would also caution the board to understand that the examination is also a changing document, and that we don't necessarily know what is or what isn't on that written examination due to exam security.
Well, actually, that's not 100% true, Paul, because you can go onto our website and it lists an outline of everything to study for the written test.
That is true.
Clearly.
Right, that is true. That's a guidance document, but the actual questions of the written exam themselves, we don't know. And I think that the purpose of that particular guideline is to ensure competence. And that's the way that the board at that time saw to do that. So when we are reviewing our disciplinary guidelines, that's something that we can review as a board.
Okay, are there any further comments or questions from board members? Seeing none, I'd like to ask if there is any public comment or questions at this time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am opening up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment on this agenda item, please type "I would like to make a comment" using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists. We are displaying instructions for your reference and we'll give you a moment. This is a moderator. I see no requests for public comment at this time. Would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you.
All right, it's closed.
Okay, it is about 11:45, and I would like to first thank our two guest attorneys today for this really helpful presentation. And it was very interesting, and it may actually engender further questions down the road. So hopefully we can filter those through Mr. Sanchez to you. But thank you again for being here today.
And thank you very much for inviting us. We are at your service. And again, we're very privileged and honored to help you do your important work. And we really have a lot of respect for board members that use your extra time to do such an important function that is difficult at times. So thank you very much for all that you do.
Yes, we're very grateful to you too as a resource. We couldn't do our jobs without you. So thanks so much. As I mentioned, it is about 11:45, and the next item on our agenda could be somewhat lengthy. So I think we might take a somewhat early lunch at this point. Last time we did about a 45-minute lunch. Hopefully that is acceptable to everybody. So approximately 12:30, 12:35 perhaps.
That sounds good. So return at 12:35?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.